with Scott Merritt with Strategic Global, and we are here to talk about how to have integrity with your PR firm, how to build a great PR firm, but also how to look for red flags with potential clients so they don't become bad clients. So, Scott, now that we've had, I think, 6 technical snafus to kick things off, let's jump into the PR side of things.
Yeah, so don't hire us to do your IT, but definitely hire us to do your PR.
So go ahead and introduce yourself, Scott.
So I'm Scott Merritt. I'm the founder and president of Strategic Global Media. We are a full service PR firm, and we've been in business now 3.5 years, working with clients in kind of a wide range of industries, everything from consumer packaged goods to deeply embedded technologies.
You and I met, Scott, probably February of last year. I was just making the pivot towards the communications industry for my firm. And I loved your tagline. Can you remind me what it is, your tagline?
Yeah, boy, people really love it or they hate it. But that's, I guess, what I'm looking for. It's call me when you're tired of working with crappy PR agencies.
That's right. And I saw this and I said, oh, this guy, Scott, and I are going to get along really, really well. So I reached out to him. We wrote an op-ed together. And we wrote an op-ed for Dwyer's about how to do pitching right, building the right media list, researching, not just relying on, spray and pray and spray,
Mhm.
whatever you want to call it. And that, I've been watching Scott on LinkedIn now. We've become friends, and I'm watching his stuff on LinkedIn, and a lot of people they complain, they gripe. But what Scott does, if you've ever watched the show NCIS, folks, is he kind of gets you with a little give style head slap to the back of the head. And he just tries to wake you up, whether you're the client who's doing something dumb or ignorant, or you're the firm that's not serving your client well. And so what we wanted to talk through is, again, how to have integrity. We'll spend a moment or two on that. But then really how to build the fundamentals of your PR firm, and then how that can make sure that you have the processes in place so you don't bring on bad clients who are headaches, who don't give the last payment, who are hard to work with, which means it hurts your team culture, it hurts your profit, it hurts your ability to grow your company. So, Scott, let's start with integrity. This is a key topic for you on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Well, I will say that, look, integrity is just kind of like doing the right thing, even when nobody's looking, right? That everybody's heard that before.
Sure.
Uh, and, here's the thing. PR is this weird black box industry that a lot of people don't understand. And it's kind of not really a secret that a lot of agencies out there take advantage of that, and they try to either misrepresent some of the things that they're doing, or they just don't behave in a way that I would say is really, I don't want to say above board, but it's they really they're just taking advantage of people's ignorance about how PR works.
And when you talk about that ignorance, I think that also impacts how we can then earn trust. Like people try to run ethical firms that provide quality. For example, last year, Marketer Collective, the conglomerate of larger firms, announced they weren't going to be doing using metrics like I think it was potential reach and impressions. I think were the two metrics they were zeroing out.
Yeah.
They're in a firm of 5 people. I don't think we've used impressions in like 8 years. Because like
I
before I
mean,
started my company, and potential reach, I wrote an op-ed for PR Daily 2 3 years back saying potential reach is not a useful measure. So it does seem like there are a lot of agencies still relying on metrics that sound impressive rather than ones that will really make a difference for their clients. I think that does make it hard for potential clients to trust that the PR agency is going to deliver value.
yeah, well, it's incumbent on us as PR practitioners, as pros, to find the ways to measure our success that actually are meaningful and that do move the needle, right?
Sure.
Uh, sure, impressions, AVE, everybody talks about AVE, advertising equivalency.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, there's not really a good way to measure that, right?
Sure.
It's a lot more esoteric than that. But if you're still citing the, well, we got a hit on Yahoo, and so our potential reach is 44 billion people. Like that's
Right,
not
right.
true. That's total BS. It's never
Right.
44 billion, 44 million people are never going to see your story, let alone 44
Well,
billion.
and I'll give you an example of that. I co-authored an op-ed with a guy a few years back, and we got it into the Daily Caller. We were targeting conservative campaigns for, to be
Sure.
potential clients. And I think the potential reach was, several million people. The actual reach, according to Meltwater Rescission, I forget which platform, was like 10,000 people, which is not a bad number. And it's a believable number for the Daily Caller. But potential reach of several million versus actual reach of 10,000 there's a massive disparity.
Yeah, and ultimately it doesn't really matter because what matters is are you reaching the right people with the
Right.
right message?
Hmm.
And very often we'll run campaigns that are very local
Right.
and like they don't these clients don't need to be in the Wall Street Journal. Like everybody wants to be in the Wall Street Journal, and I get it, right? There's a lot of prestige involved
Sure.
with that,
Yep.
but
Exactly.
they don't need to be there to meet their business objectives, right? And
Right.
what we're here to do is to help them meet their business objectives. So if your story, I'll point back to one client I had a long time ago where they could care less. They couldn't care less uh, about having some big national hit. They needed to be in the weekly newspapers, those ones that they
Right.
throw at the bottom of your driveway every week.
Yep.
That was their core. If they were there, they were happy because that was reaching the hyper local audience they needed to reach.
Yep.
So we built a campaign that was focused on reaching those outlets, right? And we
Right.
never bothered. There was never a New York Times or a Bloomberg News on that media list. Never, because
Right.
it wouldn't have mattered.
Ever. It doesn't matter at all for those. And Carly Martinelli, Lizzie Harris, Blair Huddy, and others are talking a lot about, a lot of times getting the New York Times is a complete waste. Whereas like getting into a popular Substack or getting into a niche podcast, Tracy Schmidt calls it the micro influencers, the people who have less than 10,000 followers,
Yeah.
but they're really, really engaged and they do exactly what that person says.
If you are in an industry that's super narrow
Yeah,
and the people who are interested in your products or services are a real niche group within that narrow industry,
right,
getting into an industry trade publication that maybe has, I don't
yes,
know, 4 or 5 thousand subscribers
right,
could
yep,
yield you, you know, endless amounts of leads for what it is that
right.
you're selling, right?
Hmm.
You might get one lead, or maybe you won't get any leads from a New York Times or a Wall Street Journal
Right.
hit. But I mean, sure, it feels great. It looks great. It's something to brag
Yes,
about, but it
yep,
doesn't meet the business objectives. And it's truly understanding what your goals are. Like we start every client engagement with diving deep on what your goals are. What is it that
right,
you're trying to accomplish? And how can PR help you accomplish those goals, right?
right,
Oftentimes it's not those big, those marquee media
right,
hits,
correct.
right?
That's right.
It's it,
In fact,
it's
they might
it,
hurt because they're a waste of time and effort and money.
Right. Well, that's the other side of it is, how much effort goes into getting that big story in the Wall Street Journal, right?
Right,
Again, this is not to bash the Wall Street Journal. I'm
at all.
working on actually 2 stories with the Wall Street Journal for clients right now that need to be there, right?
Correct.
That it makes
Yep.
sense for them. But they also need to be in very niche trade publications because that's where their core audience is.
Well, that's right. And let's make a pivot here. We've established some basic principles of, how to represent what we do and how we do it and the outcomes for clients. Let's pivot to, we had a good prep call yesterday on 4 or 5 key ways to build a successful company. And the first thing you said was you have to have a focus on goals. So why is that, in your opinion, the first thing for a company to look at when when a leader, whether it's a mid-level executive or the founder, the owner, the CEO, to build the company towards success.
Are you talking about uh, the my founder's journey of building my company or building a PR firm, or are you talking about the client?
Sorry, but so we're pivoting now from our integrity conversation to
Yeah,
we're assuming that our audience has integrity, right? Because if they weren't, then maybe they would have been offended by the title of this event.
right.
So how can, you said the first thing that, the PR firm should do is have a focus on goals. The executive should focus on goals for the PR firm
Yeah,
as an organization. Why is that the first step towards success?
because if you don't know what your goals are, you don't know what you're working toward. You don't, you have, if you have no focus, then everything is blurry. Uh, there's no clear path to know if you're achieving what it is that you want to achieve. So, uh, if you want to be a general service firm, great.
Mhm.
That's great. What kind of clients do you want to work with? If you have a niche, you have to understand what that niche is so that
Yes.
you're going after you're building a team that can
Yep.
help you service that niche, and you're going after the right kinds of clients that help you become the experts in that niche.
And I'll give you an example of that. My firm, I have a certain financial goal I'd like to hit in the next 4 years for my firm, primarily because I have 5 children and they have to, eat sometimes, and occasionally I'll get rained on. Um, and so to achieve that goal, I looked a year and a half ago at our prior 5.5 years of clients, and I said, "Oh, interesting. The money that we were making wasn't where I thought it was." And by looking at that data, I was able to pivot and recognize that with X amount of energy, we were generating a third of $1 million. With 10x the energy, we were generating a third the amount of money. It was a massive disparity. And it
Yeah.
took until a mentor of mine said, "Go look at your numbers, Dustin. I'll bet there's more information there than you realize." So I set my goal last summer of where I wanted to be now 4 years from now. And we're on track to get there because I looked at the goal. I said, all right, my strategy wasn't working. Oh, this strategy probably is going to work. And then we really had to narrow in on, okay, what are the services we're going to provide? A lot of what we do, 95% of what we do is op-ed writing, op-ed placement, and finding authors for op-eds for companies that don't want their name on their narrative. That's probably 95% of what we do. And that's what people want to pay
It's
for.
That well, and obviously there's a need for that in the industry, and that's a again that's a niche that
It's
you're
super
filling,
niche,
right?
right?
You're helping companies achieve something that a lot of other firms wouldn't have an expertise to be able to deliver for them. There's there's an interesting thing. I've worked with a lot of agencies over the years, and one of the things I realized about some of the ones that weren't run quite as well
Sure.
were was that they tried to be everything to everybody,
Oh gosh,
right?
yes.
You
I
know,
tried
they
that early on. It didn't work.
it was oh, that's a service you need? Great. We'll do that for you. Even if we had no ability to deliver that service, right?
No.
So I remember one day I was sitting at my desk. This is going back more than a decade, but I was sitting at my desk and the owner of the agency comes in and says, here, this client, this new client of ours needs a new website. I said, okay. All right, cool.
Right, right.
Great. Great. So, what do we got going on for PR? And he says, no, no, no. We need you to work on the website. We need you. I said, oh, you need me to write the content for the website? He says, no, I need you to build the website.
Sure.
And I said, you realize I'm not a web
Right.
developer, right? Like I'm not, that's not what I do. I don't know the first thing about it. I don't know HTML. So
Right.
he says, well, we'll get you a book. And I said, no, 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 no. You don't understand. I'm a PR guy. That's my lane.
Right.
I know my lane.
Right.
I don't, did you just sell somebody a 30 or $40,000 website and you're going to give it to me, a guy who's never even
Mhm.
like I'm lucky I can get to a website, let alone
Right.
build
You
one.
can use WordPress because it tells you what to do with every single step.
Right.
Yes.
Like, I, I, that's insanity, right? But that's
Mhm.
the so when we talk about a firm lacking integrity, boy, is
Sure.
that's a big one, right? Like a firm that just says, "Yep, we can do that, we can do that, we can do that," and then they sign the client, and then they go, "Okay, shit, now we have to figure this all out."
But I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I think a lot of people, when you're especially a one, two, three-person company, there is this common idea that generate as much sales as possible, and that's true. But a lot of people think they should generate sales doing everything they can versus narrowly, knowing the market and knowing the whole. And so I do think that like we took on digital marketing, we brought in a vendor. We've done
Right,
a few of those projects, but I feel like we took advantage of opportunities and we did provide quality service. So I do want to push back on the idea that it's only lack of integrity. I think sometimes it can be eagerness, lack of experience, overconfidence. Someone can have integrity, but not really understand
right.
how to run their company.
Well, in this case, it was a lack of integrity.
Oh, okay, my
I'll
mistake.
say
Okay. All
that.
right, fair enough. Fair enough.
But
My mistake.
all right, so but that brings up another point, right? So if you know your lane and you know what your expertise is and you know what your goals are and you know what your team's
Mhm.
capabilities are, you can bring in a third party. We
Sure.
partner with other agencies all the time to execute and activate campaigns that we're not experts at, but we can
Sure.
manage and are affiliated and associated with PR.
Hmm.
Here's the real problem. If you've identified your goals, you will
Right.
understand the kinds of clients that are going to help you reach those goals.
Yes. Yeah.
Then this is something that a lot of crappy PR firms, right? I call them out in my subhead.
Yeah.
This is something a lot of crappy PR firms do. They say yes to every single piece of business that walks through the
Yes.
door, right?
That's right. Hmm.
That is such a bad approach. We turn away a lot of business. I was
Yep.
turning away business when I founded this company and I needed revenue desperately.
Right.
Uh,
Hmm. Yep.
because it wasn't good business, right? You'll wind up with bad business. You already have limited capacity. Your team only
Right.
has so many hours in the day to get things done.
Right.
And you want to grow, but you want to grow in the right way. And
Hmm.
I've found that the power of no is like
Huge.
incredible. I it,
Huge.
when you say no to certain things,
Hmm.
that opens the door for you to say yes to better things.
We talked about this yesterday, and I promised you I was going to talk about poker, and I will. Um, a decade ago, before I started my company, some friends asked me if I wanted to play poker. And they were a little concerned because it's only $10 buy-ins, but none of us had a lot of money. And I'm pretty good at math. So they figured I would figure out, relative odds and start kicking their butts when we played once a month. I got my tail kicked almost every time. A few years later, I start my company and a different group. I moved out of the region, a different group of guys, a bunch of Catholic dads. We can't really stay too late. Two of the three games we played, we haven't even finished because it hits 10 o'clock. We all got to go home.
Right.
But I crushed these guys in all three games. There's my camera. Three in all three games. And what's the difference? I thought about it and I realized I was folding four times as often as I used to, five times as often. And I thought about it. It was about a year ago, a little over a year ago. And I went, aha, the evidence shows that we're generating more revenue as a company from the communications industry, supporting the communications industry, than we are in that traditional B2B founder CEO owned company. Why am I even emotionally attached to the fact that we're failing there and crushing it with a fraction of the effort? I need to fold. I folded 5 years, 400 hours a year of effort, $13,000 out of pocket. And I've barely gone back. I've barely looked backwards because I had to learn how to fold a whole region that I had been targeting for 5 years.
Yeah. Well, I was just able to reach behind me and it just so happens that I have this book right here, and this is the book you probably needed to do a little bit better at poker.
He did not tell me he was going to bring
It,
poker on his
it's
side of the conversation.
it's it's like it's like 1,000 pages, but it's like the poker Bible. Anyway,
Well, right,
highly
but
recommended.
I learned to fold. And so I've shared the story a little bit on LinkedIn. Last year, like a lot of PR and marketing agencies, we were not doing that great. And we got two referrals for organizations that wanted PR help. And for one, it was definitely not the right answer at all.
Yeah.
For the other one, it could have been with a bit of a different approach, but they weren't capable of executing that different approach. It was going to be $65,000 in easy, profitable work, and we turned them down
Mm.
because it wasn't the right fit. And one of those people, they did come back, and we're working with them now on a much more appropriate campaign. But to your point, we'll talk about red flags in a few minutes, but to build a company successfully, you've got to know your target audience. You've got to know your services for those audiences. You've got to know your price points. What's your profit? Who's the right team for you, right? I mean, when I first was building my team, I've hired my first person in 2020. I figured, oh, I'm going to hire, some high-powered person to run the PR squad while I run sales and marketing because I'm the founder of the company. My business partner had founded 5 firms, and he said, no, 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 hire under you. And so the way we've built the right team is we hire creative, dynamic people, but we don't pay by the hour. We pay by the project. And we don't care when or where they work as long as it gets to us on time.
Right.
But also, I hire writers, I hire editors, I hire a personal assistant. I hire the people to do the work behind me so I don't have to fact check anymore. I'm not doing much of the writing. I'm not doing much of the editing. For us, primarily as an op-ed firm that also does other earned media. We're an earned media firm that does a lot of op-eds. That's the
Sure.
right team to where we need to go.
Yeah. It's so hard to say no to revenue, right? When it's
Yes,
right there waiting for you to grab it.
correct.
But I will say that, like, don't let revenue or a sexy story sway you
Yes.
from making
You
good
said this
business
yesterday.
decisions. Yeah.
Yep.
Uh, if something, if there are red flags, and this is probably a good segue into the conversation about red flags,
Yep.
if there are red flags, don't ignore them
Yes.
just because, oh, wow, there's such an interesting, cool, sexy story here that we
Right.
want to be affiliated with, right? Uh, some clients are just bad clients, right?
Right.
They're just they're impossible to work with. We actually pulled the plug on a client a couple of months ago, and it was a sizable client. I mean, it was one of our bigger clients, and we were working with them for several months, but there were huge red flags right from the beginning. But their
Yep.
story was so sexy that it was like, okay, we'll just deal
Right.
with what we already have identified so that we can work on this business because, oh man, the amount that we can do with this. Like, we're going to get this everywhere. It's going to be
Right.
great.
Yep.
And it wound up not being great. And
Ouch.
we we ignored we
Mm.
ignored every red flag.
Yep.
Because we got so enamored by the story
Yep.
that the personalities and the people and the
Mhm.
just all the nonsense that came along with it. I mean, every 30-minute status call turned into a 90-minute therapy session, and then we
Right.
needed our own therapy session afterward
Right. Of
because, oh
course.
my God.
Right.
Uh,
Yep.
and everything, it was like trying to move a mountain every time we were putting a pitch together,
Yep.
and the story was just never really truly within reach because the people involved were incapable of, they didn't understand PR. They questioned and challenged every single thing every step of the way. I mean,
Yep.
from call number one, when they were a prospect,
Yep.
there were these just enormous red flags, and we wound up having to pull the plug on it. And
Right.
that meant saying goodbye to revenue, but it meant reclaiming our sanity. And
Right.
our mental health and our sanity is worth more than any one paying client.
Well, and I'm going to share my screen here for a moment. This is my post today, right? Stop bashing clients on LinkedIn. And Scott, you contributed to this article that we did for Strategic HQ that I interviewed you and a few other people for it.
Yeah.
And I want to point out, like, Scott, you've critiqued your client here, but the very first thing you said was we missed the red flags. And I think there's a gigantic problem in the PR industry where it's easy to, on LinkedIn or over coffee or whatever to say, oh, clients are idiots. Clients don't know anything, or the boss
Yeah.
doesn't know anything. How can they not understand marketing? It certainly is frustrating. But it's on the agency, in my opinion, to look in the mirror and say, where did we go wrong?
Yeah.
Or,
I'll say we didn't miss any red flags. We
Right.
saw them.
You
They were
ignored them.
there. They were
Right.
right in front of it. They were waving right
Yep.
in front of our faces,
Yep.
and we ignored them.
Right. We early on, I had a business club, did a presentation. Guy said to me, Dustin, I really like what you're talking about. What would it cost you? What would you charge me to do this kind of service? You know, it was a very generic statement. And I was so early on. I just said, I don't know, could be 5K, maybe more. 5K a month? We could hire a communications director for that. Did the math. 5 times 12 is 60, living in the DC metro area. No, I don't think so. And so he and I ended up sending him some litmus test questions. We have between 6 and 10 questions we send every prospect. Because of this person, if you don't answer the questions 24 hours ahead of the scheduled meeting, we're not meeting with you. You're clearly not ready to invest because you're not able to be prepared or you're not willing to respect our time. I learned that because a week later I said, hey, dude, have you answered the questions? He goes, oh, let's grab lunch. So I got ready, headed up, we get there. He says to the waiter, hey, we're splitting the bill, right, Dustin? At this expensive business club. Sure, I guess so. We talk for almost an hour. I do a good job of mirroring what he's saying. And he goes, yep, everything I've said here, Dustin, you have outlined it correctly. I said, great. But none of that is what we need. And by the way, I haven't told my business partners that we've spoken, and I haven't looked at your questions yet. Now, I was depressed for like a couple of days,
Yeah.
but that was a core lesson for me is if you don't respond to these questions, maybe I'll give one reminder. Other than that, that's a red flag. And we almost every time will not move into the meeting phase.
Yeah. Engagement in a an agency client relationship is
Huge.
one of the most important or the most important factor in being successful.
Huge.
If you have
Yes.
an absentee client, like how many times have we come across clients that just hire us and go,
Right.
okay, we hired you, go do PR and
Right.
and let us know
Yes.
when you get results. Like that
Yeah.
doesn't work, right? If you
No.
have an absentee client, it's
Correct.
impossible, right?
Yes.
Because you won't even respond to me with a simple question. How am I
Right.
going to go to the media? How am I going to go to a journalist and say, "Would you like to interview this person?" I don't even know if I'm going to be able to get that person on the phone.
Well, but also, Lauren Parker with Slide Nine and I had a LinkedIn live chat a few weeks ago, and we talked a lot about the team, the right team. I can't go to my team and say, "Hey, can you scramble because the client isn't communicating? They finally got in touch with us, and now I, as the leader, am asking you to give up your weekend or give up your evening. And by the way, the client isn't paying enough for me to compensate you for that."
Right.
And that's a real problem. I mean, we're largely a project-based company. We fill gaps for PR and other agencies, and sort of the executive strategists, fractional CCO types. We fill gaps, which means we do some scrambling. But the idea is to build to a drumbeat and then a retainer relationship so that we can plan and we can grow. And Lauren was describing how looking at when she took over her firm, it had 8 people. This is in 2020, an easy year to take over any kind of company. 5 years later, they have 22 staff, and they were a project-based client. And she had to look at their financials and say, okay, how can we get to a retainer model? So we're doing less work on the front end to get the sale, but we're doing more work to generate that ongoing revenue. And that was they had to turn the whole company's finances and then the team and how they provided services and they communicated to clients upside down to achieve that.
Yeah. It's it's interesting. Most of the work that we do is retainer. We try to avoid projects as best we
Sure.
can.
Of course.
They're just they're too disruptive. I mean, they can be lucrative, but
Sure.
it's very project dependent if we take
Right.
them on.
Sure.
Uh, that's why uh, uh, this goes back to a lot of people through no fault of their own being ignorant about PR, how PR works, right? PR is not a toggle switch, right?
No,
PR,
no.
PR,
Yes, yes,
you can't just say, okay, well, this month we're going to stop and next month we're going to start. And,
correct.
it just doesn't work that way. It's momentum based. So,
Yes,
uh, so we try to always, even if we have a client that starts or a prospect that starts by talking about, well, maybe we'll just, dabble, try a project. Uh, we always, with a fairly good success rate, convince them why a retainer makes a lot more sense. Now,
sure.
That said, we work with clients who say, yeah, you know what, we're just going to kind of stop for this month or a month or two, and
Sure.
then we'll restart. We'll come back to you. And I mean that's it's not effective.
At
It
all.
doesn't work, right?
No.
You
Right.
you may as well just take all that money, go get it out of the bank, uh, build a nice pile in front of your house and set it on fire.
Well, especially because we had this happen where we did a project and it was a scramble project. Thankfully, I was able to compensate my team with the amount of money we made on the project. And we did a 6-day project. We got 6 placements for the client. A 4-day project. We got a 6 placements for the client. 4 in their industry, 1 not in their industry, and 1 as a regional hit where their HQ was. They were super happy. And we said, great, let's start setting up a plan so we're not scrambling next time. So, a month and a half later, we got the call. Hey, we have this reporter interested. Let's set up a media event around this interview. That that doesn't seem like the best use of flying people in and renting a play and all these other resources, but we could try. So we did. We got 0 placements, and they just weren't prepared. And so thankfully, their PR lead has been pushing them, and we're pretty sure they're going to sign for a plan that he laid out. It's a
Yeah.
solid plan to do that drumbeat momentum for when we have the big piece of news, and then cruise into Q3 with that momentum carrying them into their industry. But these project, this client, from an outcome perspective, essentially wasted $7,000 because we couldn't do anything with the way they want us to execute their strategy.
Yeah, that's so we as the PR experts in the room understand what the likelihood is that something's going to work versus not
Right.
work.
And to be fair,
And
we were honest with them. We told them that up front.
right. And that's all you can really do. I mean, if they insist on wasting their money on something and you've already given them all the reasons that it's a bad idea,
Right.
it's, okay, well then let's go do the thing that you insist on doing, right?
Right.
Uh, we spend a lot of time trying to educate our clients on what makes the most sense,
Yep.
what really is going to move the needle.
Sure.
And, you know, again, there are a lot of firms out there that'll just take the money and say, you know what, well, you're offering the money up, we'll take it.
Right.
We try to give you a reason not to spend the money.
So let's do this, Scott. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. We've been talking negative for about 15 minutes now. Let's talk a little positively here. Let's talk about some client successes and why those clients were a success. Because it takes two to tango, as you said earlier. And we have
Yeah.
about 12 minutes left. And I'd love for us to finish on a more positive note.
Okay. Can I start by answering the second question first?
Oh,
What? Yeah.
sorry. I
Why is
apologize.
it successful?
Yeah,
Because the clients are good partners and they trust our advice and our guidance.
that's right. And that requires the first part. And that's the key is a lot of people want a good client, but we have to have that process. Again, I have to have my litmus test. In 2021, my company, we were asked for 8 different 6-figure proposals. I was so excited. One of those would have set us for the year. My wife could have stopped working. We were pregnant with our third child at that point. And I put together these proposals that were between 220,000 and 910,000. And even that big one, the company wanted to double from 60 million to 110 million. So I was giving them a price point of 2% of the gross they wanted to gain. All 8 said no, 6 of them for price reasons. And I was crushed. It completely
Yeah.
burned me out because it was digital marketing, it was everything. But I made 2 major mistakes. I didn't understand the scope of work conversation that was necessary for the education. And 2, I didn't understand that someone who's never invested in marketing and branding needs maybe a bite at the apple before they get the whole watermelon. And I just didn't understand that. And again, that was on me. So that was a hugely depressing, but also educational year.
Yeah.
And that's when we really began to narrow more down on just doing PR, earned media, op-eds, media lists, pitch in the press. That's what we do best. And especially as a lot of the industry shifts towards LinkedIn and Substacks, we think that for us, for our company, that opens up a lot of opportunity for us to fill that op-ed hole.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, I will say, there we I say I'm kind of famous for saying this at this point because I say it all the time.
Oh boy.
When a client comes to me and says, we want to do this. Okay, why do you want to do that?
Right.
Well, because we want to be part of that conversation. Okay. Usually this happens when they're ambulance chasing, when they're trying to news. No, I guess our term of art is newsjack, right? But
Right, right.
uh, uh,
Which is legitimate within a larger campaign.
sure. It's not my favorite way to operate,
Sure,
but yeah, okay, fine. I will often say, you know, there's like one way for this to go right, and about a million ways for it to go wrong.
sure,
If you're comfortable with that level of risk and those odds, then we'll do it. And that usually
sure.
stops people dead in their tracks, and they go, "Oh, you know what? When you put it like that,
Yeah, I like that approach. I'm not, I usually say something like, then PR may not be the right answer because you're looking for this goal and PR will accomplish this goal. But
right,
I think yours is better because it allows them to come to the answer on their own versus you telling them the answer.
right. I'm just laying it out for them, right? We
Right,
can do this."
right.
And our likelihood of success threading that really super tiny needle
Hmm.
is it's we're facing an uphill battle here.
Right.
So
Yeah.
anyway, so you wanted to talk about positive stuff. Why do the successful campaigns work? Uh, because because clients view us as partners, not as
Yes.
vendors, because they trust our expertise, because they let us do what we do best while they focus on what they do best, and they're just true partners. That's why success happens. Now, how do you get to success? That's a whole nother story. I mean, that's a tactical discussion that we can have.
Well, and I think a lot of it is you have to have the processes. So we took on a client this year that they've been a wonderful client to work with on almost every level. And one of the things that it took a while to get on the books was a regular meeting. They were a great client, but we were constantly rushing. It was a bit
Mm,
of a scramble every single time. And we finally have now a twice a month meeting where we can actually look forward and say, okay, what's going to happen in 2, 4, and 6 weeks?
right.
And so far, they've been a great partner. And this is going to make an even better partnership because now we can produce those better results. They're happy with the fact that sometimes we're going to get this level of placement or this level. It averages out. Sometimes we're going to get the lower level, but maybe it's with a higher tier name and they're going to spread it more on social. They
Sure.
understand all of that. The big challenge was we're not the only firm they're working with. And so by having that regular meeting, we can now understand where they're going strategically. So we can make sure we fill the lane that's maybe missing that we couldn't have known otherwise.
Yeah, we hired we were hired by we signed a client
Sure.
just about a month ago, a little over a month ago. And we knew that we were jumping straight into the deep end, right? There
Yep.
was no time for the traditional onboarding, right?
Sure.
The deep
Yep.
dive conversation and the laying out the plan and the strat. There was no time for that.
Right.
They were 3 weeks out from issuing a major industry report.
Oh,
They were also 3 weeks out from uh, activating a trade show media engagement program,
so nothing really important going on. Okay.
and and just a few days after that trade show and report, there was a major piece of news that was going to break that was going to involve like globally impactful news, right? That they
Mhm.
were involved with. In a good way, in a good way. It wasn't,
But still,
we weren't jumping into a crisis.
right.
The only crisis was, oh my God, we just signed and we now have to activate this massive program to do these three things simultaneously.
Right.
And I mean, we got past it. It was a lot of work, and we had an extraordinary amount of success. But that's because, look, we've sharpened our tools over all these years. We have these processes that we know work,
Right.
and we got in bed with a client that trusted us to do what they hired us to do.
Yes. And that's
So
the key, right? They
that,
listened to
that
your advice and they said, if we're, and they must have been paying you quite a lot of money for this amount. So if they're going to pay you this amount, well, geez, why don't we trust you, Scott?
right, right. So what we did was we actually were able to combine the two of those things. We
Right.
combined the issue of the report with the trade show
No
because it
surprise.
made sense. It made sense to issue the report from the trade show. We
Right.
were able to secure them a an official slot for a press conference, and
Nice.
so that married those two things together. Now there were still two independent uh, pitching campaigns going on, right? There was the trade
Sure.
show
Of
specific,
course.
and then there was
The
uh,
wider report.
the report specific, but we were able to activate it all simultaneously,
Hmm.
and they were over the moon, right?
Right.
They saw what we did for them, and this is not to pat myself on the back. Well, it's a little bit to pat myself on the back because
Sure.
we did a good job.
I can't
Uh,
reach you, Scott, but I'll try.
yeah, we'll do a virtual
Yeah,
fist
yeah,
bump. There we
exactly.
go.
Exactly.
But they were so happy. And here's the thing that happens occasionally and probably not often enough, but boy, does it feel good when it happens. The client publicly shouts you out on social media. And
Wow.
we have had that happen twice in the past month with two different clients.
Wow. That's amazing.
And I mean, boy, there's nothing like, I mean, yes, we want to get paid and we like the money in our bank accounts, but nothing motivates the team more than being recognized by the client for doing a great job for them.
We have a client that we're working with now. One of the clients I turned down at the end of last year, they have a major youth conference. Almost 20,000 kids are going to go to a single location. And among other things, they're going to do an estimated 150,000 service hours in the region they're going to. So we were brought in. It's a conference they do every few years. And we realized early on in the conversations that this wasn't just a national campaign for some of the goals they had, but also because there's a lot of big conferences. What we ended up doing was asking them to introduce us to some of their state and regional spokespeople. And we've now done a couple of interviews with college students and one college student, one high school student who are attending this conference. Their personal stories are so compelling. We've actually made a pivot. This one young lady from, I won't get into all the details, but she at 15 was in a car accident, had to learn to walk, talk, all of it. Her father held her neck while she was put into the ambulance. He's a firefighter. Her story is so compelling. We think this story can get into USA Today or Fox as an op-ed. And sure, the client's conference is only mentioned for a paragraph,
Yeah.
but that story is so compelling. It's going to humanize the client's efforts in a way that just can't be done without them introducing us to their district communication person, who then said, tailor it this way, but also this is the person to talk to, not the person the national people suggested. Couldn't have known that with the national people being willing to make those introductions, be
Right.
involved in those email chains, and really being a partner in that process.
Yeah. Recognizing that human interest is what sells some of these stories like this is,
Yeah,
I mean, that's part and parcel to having a successful campaign. Nobody wants to write about your event just because the event
right.
exists. They
Because it
want to
happened.
write about
Right,
it because, who's involved and why are they involved
right.
and how is it relatable? And that's where
That's right.
the personalities come in.
Yeah, well, and also again the partnership. We reached out to the large. I know I happen to know an editorial writer, at one of the largest papers in the state where this event is being held. I called him, and he said, "Dustin, I need data. It can't just be some conference is happening. Give me the data." And I said, "Oh, they're getting that for you right now." Oh, good.
Yeah.
A week out, Dustin, let me know. Without the client being a partner in the messaging and understanding, we trust you guys. Okay, great. We'll make the introductions to the district people. They're going to introduce us to these students, to others involved. And also because of that, that generated a new idea. We're doing 3 meetings with their regional communications people so that whenever we get something in the press, they're sending it out to every single allied organization in their region for extra social promotion. Those
Perfect.
those things wouldn't have happened. That's not, yes, we had the ideas, but those ideas couldn't have happened without the client being an excellent partner.
Yeah, that's sensational. And I love it. I love it. That's just the way to do it and to do it with integrity.
Exactly. All right. So I know we have some technical snafus on the front end. The good thing is ending the call is just hitting a couple of buttons. So this will be an
Okay.
easy exit. So Scott, this has been fun. You and I talked on the phone, we've talked on Zoom, but never in front of other people. So this was a lot
Yeah.
of fun. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I loved it and I'll look forward to doing it again.
Yeah. All right. Everyone have a good day. Take care.
Thanks.